So great, good stuff. Thanks everyone for joining. You're very welcome to this workshop on restorative justice assessments. Just to say that I am recording this. So thanks everyone for allowing me to do that. And if you haven't done so already, please feel invited to just put in the chat your name and institution, as well as what you teach or study, and if there is anything, what you hope to get out of today. And very glad today to be joined by, I think we're up to about 34 people, all of whom either teach restorative justice or who are currently studying restorative justice. And I'm very grateful indeed to some of our master's students from Maynooth University here in Ireland and also from Vermont Law School in the US for your participation today. And we're going to foreground your voices as much as possible. So thanks so much for that, guys. So just to note before I give a little bit of context is that, we're going to operate this as restoratively as possible. We're really keen to hear from everyone, and there'll be opportunities for group work and to hear from everyone. But just to, please be somewhat brief in speaking if you can, just because we're really hoping to get everyone through this in the allotted time of a couple of hours. So, just very briefly, by way of background, this idea emerged from a number of workshops that happened online last year that were focused on restorative justice pedagogy, by which I mean the teaching of restorative justice in universities, in collaboration with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime and their Education for Justice program. We set up a number of kind of regional meetings, all of which were recorded and published online. And then subsequently, people from each region got together and gave a webinar about restorative justice approaches to teaching criminology and criminal justice more widely. So subsequently, we kind of maintained that mailing list. And one of the ideas that came out on the day of one of those workshops, and I think if I'm not mistaken, it was Mikhail originally who might have said this, was around, what does a restorative approach to assessments look like? And there was, some broad agreement that would be an interesting thing to look into. And so here we are today, all gathered online to talk about that. The collaboration specifically between Maynooth and Vermont is underpinned by the fact that Lindsay and I know each other quite well, have worked together on stuff before, and indeed we brought together um, our master's students from the two programs earlier in the year for a kind of a restorative dialogue session, which was fantastic. So just a couple more things was a couple of questions that Alana and I would like to talk about to just to start, which is what do we mean when we say assessments? And let me just ask, someone might have their microphone on and is a little bit of background noise. If you could just check that, please, guys. So when we're talking about assessments, specifically we're talking about, essays, exams, presentations, any process by which people are graded in restorative justice courses in universities. Okay. And why did we feel there was a need to convene to discuss assessments in restorative justice courses? I suppose a couple of reasons for me, one of which is that as I think more and more about how to apply restorative principles and practices in universities, and I suppose in teaching and learning in particular, it seems like there would be an opportunity to do that in assessments. And in particular, assessments, frankly, from my experience, is pretty much the worst part for students. And it's not exactly the best part for us either. So it seemed like a great place to start to think about, whether we can uh, whether we can possibly enhance that process a little bit more, ensure that it meets people's needs a little bit more. But I'll just pass over to Alana then to talk about that a little bit as well.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick introduction. My name is Alana Ojibwe, and I work at the Vermont Law School with the Center for Justice Reform, and we have our master's program in restorative justice, as well as the home to the National Center on Restorative Justice. So I'm really grateful to be here, joined by all of you, and maybe I can.
I got it. Yeah, I got it there.
Thanks, Ian. Um, Yeah, just very grateful to be here, joined by our students, and also just want to echo um, acknowledgement and thanks to Lindsay Pointer, who really kind of launched this partnership between the two schools, and our particular two groups of students have been running these parallel sustained dialogue conversations, which was kind of developed as a way to create community and ongoing dialogue for these cohorts of master's students to kind of take a deeper dive into their restorative programs and connection with each other through these programs. So it's been really exciting to see how that's evolved and to be working with students throughout that process. And again, I just echo a lot of the same things that Ian has mentioned. In my role, I work both with students and faculty. Um, and assessment has really been something that comes up very frequently in both. And I think that when it's done well, it certainly has been one of the highlights of really how we look at um, applying the principles and content that students are learning in courses in a way that learning really is measured in a way that brings growth, rather than feeling like something that just needs to be done, that they are solely graded on, but really as an opportunity to reflect on their own experience and learning. And so I know both from our faculty and students, there's a lot of interest in just taking a deeper dive into how we can make that a more restorative process for students and faculty alike. So um,
That's great, Alana. Look, I'm trying to work out how to. I think I can only spotlight one person at a time. I think I just accidentally. I saw Trina's face. I threw her up there. Yeah, so I don't think I can spotlight more than one person at a time. Can I?
um,
Possibly.
are you spotlighting or
Oh,
pinning?
I am. No, I can see it here. Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute. If I can. Yes, sorry. Working on it. Working on it
No
here.
worries. It may say something like add
Can
spotlight
you
for
can
the
you
remaining.
see a few people spotlighted right now? Yeah, okay, okay. I just need to manually go through and throw everyone in there. There's still a couple that I'm missing, but no, it was really interesting just to fill the space with some comments. I thought what was most interesting, Alana, when we were talking about it, was that you, I think, had this beautiful image of assessment really being a good thing, and I almost had this quite cynical feeling of how can we make this at least not awful. So it was a great collaboration, I think, to have. Add spotlight. Who am I missing here? Oh, Kate, I need to spotlight you. Is Caleb here?
Let's see.
Caleb, can you hear me? Are you with us? We might be. I think this is our master's students that we have. So we can make a start then, Alana, with the circle.
Great. So thank you again for our group of students who are with us. We have Trina, Kate, and Grace from University of Maynooth, and we have Kyla and Emma here with us now. And I think we have a couple other students who may be finishing up possibly an assessment right now in one of their other courses. So hopefully they'll be joining in just a bit. So for this first round, and just to check, is that looking okay for everyone else? Can you see all the students? Trina, Kate, Kyla, Emma. Great. Great. So I will put a circle order in the chat, but I'm seeing Trina first on my screen. So if that's okay, we'll start with Trina and maybe alternate between University of Maynooth and Vermont Law students. To get started, so Trina, our first question is, if you could describe a typical experience of university assessment, in what ways is that similar, or does it differ from assessment in your restorative justice course? And also, just to clarify, for other purposes, if it's helpful, I think there's some different terminology that may be used, whether it's module or course. but in your restorative justice module. Um, yeah, so why is that important? Describe a typical assessment, and how is that different or similar than assessment in your restorative justice course?
Typical assessment I would describe as stressful, particularly around exam times. I've often found there's kind of a disjoint between expectation clarity. There's not a lot of communication between what lecturers expect and what they want from us, so we don't really know what to provide for you. Um, and I suppose that differs from my restorative justice assessment in that Ian took a very restorative approach in that he got us involved in like detailing what the question was. He was asking our opinion on it. He kind of got a consensus for what we were comfortable with. He went through our anxieties with it and stuff like that. So it was very clear to us what Ian was expecting and that there was support there for us if we wanted or needed it, as opposed to other assessments that I've had, which are quite like, this is what I want you to do, now off you go and do it. You kind of feel like you're on your own a little bit, whereas you actually feel kind of supported to learn in a restorative justice context.
Thank you. And I hope the order posted in the chat, but Kyla, same question for you. If you could describe a typical experience of assessment in a university context and how that differs in some ways to your restorative justice classes.
Yeah, I definitely echo Trina. Please correct me if I'm okay, good. It's definitely sometimes unclear goals and expectations of what's expected. Unless you're dealing with like a multiple choice format, then there's like an objectively a right answer and objectively a wrong answer. You know, there's only so many ways that you can, you know, thinking in the context of science, like how many neutrons does hydrogen have, right? Like there's only so many ways that you can answer that. But I feel like with restorative justice, it's almost not able to fit in a multiple choice format, just because you're almost learning about like a new way of thinking and a new perception of justice. So for me, I don't think multiple choice in restorative justice would work the way it would in a traditional university setting. It's just, yeah. And so I think it's really important to like find a way to test the material in a way that kind of, you know, have the test like accommodate to the subjectivity of restorative justice, as opposed to like, you know, sciencey exams and, you know, those get multiple choice or, you know, just like really cut and dry answers that are either right or wrong. But yeah, definitely echoing what Trina said, traditional university exams can be high stress. And I feel like restorative justice has the opportunity to not be stressful. So if there was a way that we could incorporate that somehow, I think that would really change my perception of exams.
Thank you. And Kate, same question goes to you.
Thank you. I can only really echo again what Trina and Kyla have actually already said. Traditionally, exams and even assignments I find to be quite stressful because you're kind of dropped into it. If it's a group assignment, it's a little bit different because we can all collaborate and work together. But when it comes to it being kind of a restorative approach, it's much more accessible and it's much kind of just easier to kind of grasp what the lecturer is looking for and what is expected of you going forward as well, because we both want a good outcome at the end of it, you know. So I think it's important for that to be interpreted and collaborated into the system itself.
Thank you. And Emma?
Hi, everyone. So this question, a couple distinctions come up for me. The first is undergrad education versus graduate school. My experience studying philosophy for 4 years in undergrad was like very much riddled in a competitive nature with hyper focus on grades. And my experience in grad school, while there's not as much of a competitive nature, grades still are stressed. And while there are less multiple choice exams and kind of like fine-tuned A or B kind of methods of assessment. Essays, which are the predominant means of grading, for me at least in studying RJ, it's still very narrow and doesn't provide a lot of opportunity for application. It's very theoretical, in my opinion. And even though it provides more opportunity for creativity, it's still very limiting in its capacity, especially if writing doesn't come naturally for you. And lastly, I wanted to put a little emphasis on still a similarity between undergrad and grad school is this relationship that only exists between me and the teacher when it comes to assessment. There is no involvement with peers, or very little involvement with peers, and there's very little involvement with other community members that could potentially have some kind of influence on the assessment process. And then I will pass it off to Grace.
Thank you. Yeah, I really do also have to echo what everyone else has said, because I really do agree with it. I think that just because we've been used to doing assessments a certain way throughout our undergrad, just because we get used to doing it a certain way doesn't mean that we couldn't do it better. We couldn't look at a different option, look at it from a different perspective. Compared to a typical assessment for me, I think I lost my name. A typical assessment for me is really like, it's always very independent, which can be either good or bad. So it's always it can be quite stressful. So I think the restorative in the restorative module, it's just much more supportive and kind of group oriented, and you feel like it's just a different attitude, which really stands true in the long run, because I feel like you learn more as well, as opposed to just being given an essay title and told, off you go, come back to me in 2 months with with your result or whatever. So I kind of agree with what everyone else has said. That's my contribution.
Thank you all so much. And it looks like I think we will have our other student at least joining in a few moments, but until then, I will pass it off to Ian.
Thanks, Alana. And already I'm so glad we did this, because I mean, there's already 6 new ways of thinking about it that I hadn't considered. And there's only 5 of you at the moment, so I mean, 6 is quite good. Look, I'm going to take it for the next question. And for this one, I'd like to invite you guys to tell us a little bit about whether there's anything you've learned in a restorative justice course that you feel maybe wasn't captured in an assessment, or that could be captured in an assessment but hasn't been, or maybe that's difficult to measure even. So I'm going to use the same order and start with Trina.
Can I ask a question of clarification before
Yep.
we continue? Do you mean like a topic within restorative justice that hasn't been captured in an assessment, or do you mean like a restorative kind of practice that hasn't been incorporated into an assessment?
Both. Hit me with all of it.
Okay. In terms of topic wise, I don't think anything from my experience has been missed. I know for an assessment that I had to do for my undergrad, it was about, victim satisfaction with restorative justice, but it went through like definitions and principles and all that kind of stuff. And it's the same this time. We're evaluating the use of restorative justice in response to a particular issue of our choice, which is great. So in terms of topics, I feel like anything that has been included in the course so far is up for an assessment, depending on how you phrase your answer, basically. I suppose in terms of sort of practice, I don't really feel as though anything has been missing so far from my experience. I mean, we were involved, we reached a consensus, everything was done in a very kind of diplomatic manner. Everyone had an equality of voice in terms of voicing their opinions about the assessment and stuff. So for that, again, no, in my experience, I don't think anything has been missed.
Thanks, Trina. And Kyla.
Yeah. The first thing that came to mind was like measuring change, like perceptions. That might be difficult to measure in an exam. I can only speak from the perspective of the United States, or from a citizen here, but we've been trained to essentially feel the only way we can achieve justice is through the adversarial system. And then when people who get out of prison, they come out, we also have like this negative connotation attached with people who have been released. And with restorative justice, I have learned to completely throw that out of the window. But like, how would you really measure that in an exam? It would be my only thing that I think is missing. And just kind of like reevaluating your whole perception of what justice is and what the legal system can do for you and your community. That's the one thing that I think is missing. But it might just be like an impossible standard. But yeah, other than that, I don't feel, through my like final papers, I don't feel that there was nothing, or there was anything that I wasn't prepared for in the process of writing my final paper. So by default, well, I guess besides like the empathy part that I mentioned a little bit earlier, that was the only thing that was missing. And I pass to Kate.
Thank you, Kyla. Yeah, I suppose for me, coming through the undergrad, I did a double major, so I kind of had a little bit more of a limited access into restorative justice in that sense. I came across it briefly, I suppose, throughout my undergrad, and then when I came into the master's program, it was obviously a lot more intense, and it's obviously based around my dissertation now, In terms of assessment, a few little things popped up here and there that were significantly different from, I suppose, how I would have worked before. And moving forward, in terms of practice, it's definitely, I think, given me a much wider viewpoint on what can be achieved through it, like when in comparison with what has been done before with myself. I'll pass to Emma.
Thanks. So something that I think the majority of my classes have done phenomenally well is have me critically analyze how the system is as it is now and discuss why it is imperfect and how it can be better with the application of RJ principles. Something that I think my classes could work on, but I also have total sympathy, especially with an education online. So all of these will kind of fall in one umbrella category. I made a list. So we've got empathy relating to other people. I feel like hasn't been graded and would be very difficult to grade. Circle facilitation, group skills, people skills, my engagement with community, how I am received with people that are vulnerable, marginalized, oppressed, impoverished. And then my understanding, appreciation, and honoring of RJ's roots, particularly Indigenous peoples. I think restorative justice for me is just so rooted in community. It just is really, it falls short when it comes to assessments when we keep RJ in the classroom. And then I will pass it to Grace.
Thank you, Emma. I love that. I love that community element. It's lovely. So yeah, I think just to echo Kate, actually, yeah, where I was going to start on. My undergrad was law and criminology, so it was such a new learning experience. Like learning in a restorative way was so different compared to learning from a legal perspective. And I found myself being much more engaged with that like style of learning as opposed to what I had been doing before. So that I really enjoyed that. So I didn't really notice any shortcomings because I just felt like this is great from the off really. I liked the way it caused, like, learning in this way, it caused me to kind of reevaluate many components in my learning. So I'd say that was how I would applied it to my life in practice. Then I can see the methods being very real and like very, very applicable to everyday life. So I really enjoyed just learning about it in this way. So I'll pass it on. Oh, was I the last person?
That's good. Yeah, thanks, Grace. So
Okay.
I'll pass it back over to Alana to facilitate the last piece here.
Great. So some of you touched on this a little bit in your answers to this last question, but if you could build on that or maybe take a new direction, in what ways could educators improve your experience with assessment or make assessments more meaningful? So in an ideal world, what could improvement look like to make them more meaningful?
Me? Yeah, okay. I have two. They're kind of bones of contention with me, to be honest. So the first one is related to exams and exam topics. Now, I know you can't tell us what's on the exams. I completely appreciate that. I think a degree of expectation clarity and empathy needs to be brought into lecturers' approach to exams, though. I know you know that I can't learn an entire semester's worth of topics for an exam that might come up for one or two of those things. So I think a little bit of guidance and a little bit of empathy for the fact that exams are really stressful times for us. And, you know, your exam isn't my only subject. What I have to do for you, I have to do for 3-4 other lecturers. So I think empathy and a bit of expectation clarity will go a long way in terms of improving your relation with your students in that sense, and also just being mindful of the absolute mental stress that exams can have on students. Another one is related specifically to kind of written assessments for essays and stuff. Open up a dialogue with your students. Ask them what they want to know. Ask them what they want to learn about. Ask them what their areas of interest are. You know, I have a very different approach to writing an essay for a topic because I have to write on it, to writing an essay for a topic that I genuinely care about and I'm so passionate about and really, really interested in learning and possibly pursuing in further research in. So I think it's really important to open up that dialogue with your students, have that conversation, involve them in that process and see, you know, what do my students want to learn and how can I facilitate that learning for them? I'll pass to Kyla, sorry.
No, yeah, you basically took the words right out of my mouth. I think I learn the material a lot better when professors give you the flexibility to choose a specific topic you have great interest in, and then you can just run with it. But you took like a really interesting perspective in preparing for exams. The way I thought about this question was like after the fact when you take it. So for me, feedback is the most beneficial component, especially with written exams, because or essays, I guess whatever you call them, because you can understand the way understand how professors grade and what they expect for future exams as well. Unfortunately, it's just specific to that class, but you can still get a better understanding of how to improve in the eyes of that professor. And a lot of the time on final papers, you don't get that feedback. And I can understand how it might be seen as unnecessary because it is the last exam and you're not going to be taking that class again. But it would be wonderful to still have professors go the extra mile and tell you, you know, what they really liked about your paper, what you could have improved on. So yeah, for me, feedback after the fact is a way for the professors to make, you know, their exams more meaningful for me. And I pass to, sorry, I have to scroll up, Kate.
Thank you. To be honest with you, I think as well, Trina, you took the words out of my mouth, particularly when it comes to exams. I mean, you're dead right. You know, like the lecturer for that one exam is not our only lecturer. That's not our only class. Like I often find, particularly in my undergrad, sometimes like for quite a few modules, like it could have been like just a shot in the dark. You know, you would study 3 or 4 topics that you had a very good feeling that were going to come up, but then you know, on the day you'd be lucky if you got one, you know. When it comes to doing the assignments, I think it's great to get the students actually involved in the topic so that they can either choose their own topic or they can come to a consensus on what topics can be put forward, just because it's a lot of stress, I suppose, when a question is just thrown at you and you're expected to do all the research, come back in 3 weeks and have it done, you know. And then when you go in to sit an exam, whether it's, you know, answering questions or it's, you know, your full assessment exam, once again, I think feedback after the fact is fantastic to get. You know, I don't think I'm alone here in being, you know, waiting 2 or 3 months to get feedback for a paper, and then you all of a sudden have another one due 3 weeks from then, you know. So it's really good to have that feedback from that as well. I'll pass to Emma.
So yeah, I definitely touched upon my answer to this question the last round. I can't emphasize more. I think assessments really need to be more community centric than class centric. I think some suggestions I have would be to avoid a culture of stress. I think there's a lot that can be done, such as the negotiation of submission dates, such as having your classmates get more involved with the grading or critical analysis of your project or presentation or essay, whatever it may be, rather than just the heavy emphasis on what the teacher thinks. I think a lot more group projects. For instance, one class I had to go out and interview a community member and then write an essay on it, but it was so meaningful to get a voice of experience in my actual community in Maine, which is like kind of, you know, rural. And I think a little more emphasis on individuals communities versus the school's community, especially during COVID and online. Lastly, I kind of have this like theory. I don't know how it is in Ireland or elsewhere in the world, but in the States, in order to get your therapy license, you have to commit 200 plus hours of unpaid service in the community. I would never want to ask anyone trying to get a degree in RJ to commit 200 plus hours. But I do think an externship or an internship opportunity should be mandatory. And I will pass it to Grace.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, I really agree with what Trina was saying about exams, because I've always thought that like exams just, in my opinion, aren't an accurate enough description of your intelligence, because it's a memory game. Look, you can, all your grade is riding on how much you can remember, how much composure you can give yourself on the day to not freak out and forget it all after trying to memorize it for weeks. So, and I particularly kind of thank COVID for it in a way, because COVID has meant that a lot of our exams are now online. They're all like assessments, continuous assessments, but you in turn have to work so much harder for this. You have to do weeks of research, actually learn about the topic, because you just don't get a good grade unless you understand the topic and can regurgitate it back better, so that you show that you understand it, which is just so much better in my opinion than memorizing it all, because you don't really know if they just are really good at remembering stuff, they did it the night before, or if they actually have been doing it for weeks. So it is really, really good to just have the continuous assessment. Like, yeah, the exams just don't do it for me. And also to reflect on what Kate was saying as well about like feedback, I think feedback would be great, because I know you can get your feedback from exams, but you kind of have to go looking for it a bit. Like I think it would be great if we could just get like our result and feedback all in one go, because you almost can't be expected to know how to do better in that particular exam, because it was a few months ago anyway. It's going to take you a long time you might not want to go around full circle and go back to it at that stage. So it'd be great to just get the feedback so you don't have to go reflect back a year after to get that feedback. I think it would really help in the long run. So I'll pass it back to Alana.
Grace, and thank you all. I think I am keeping an eye on the chat, and it looks like I'm sure there's going to be some eager responses to all of this. Really great ideas, and really appreciate all of your thoughts and feedback on this. I have one final question that I would love to just hear your thoughts on. And again, some of you may have touched on this in a previous answer, but I'm wondering if you could share a particular example and be as specific as you want about an assessment, or however you want to phrase that in your mind, of a learning opportunity that you've experienced that stands out in your mind as a really positive example that we can learn from when assessment was done right. What did that look like to you?
I'm gonna actually have to go with my restorative justice assessment for this semester because, like I said, it's to critically assess the use of restorative justice in response to a specific area within criminal justice. But that's open to so many broad areas of the justice system or specific social justice issues. So, for example, I'm looking at the use of restorative justice in the Irish state's response to mother and baby home survivors. So it's something that I'm really interested in. I'm very passionate about it, and I'm getting to take a subject and a topic that I love and I appreciate, and I really think could do a lot of good. And I'm I'm not being told how to take that and apply it to a topic. I now have to sit down. I have to do all of the research that I don't mind doing because I love both of these topics. So I have to teach myself and take accountability for my own learning by looking at what restorative justice can do in this situation and basically coming up with my own conclusions for how the state can respond. So it's been done in a way that it's tailored to something that I love and something that I'm really passionate about and something that I want to see meaningful change done around. And it's also done in a way that I am forced to take accountability and responsibility for my own learning and my own research and my own edification. So I think the way it's been done in my restorative justice one is probably how I would like to see assessments done more throughout universities. Sorry, I'll pass to Kyla.
No, it's okay. The first thing that popped into my head was one psychology assessment that I had to do back at university in undergrad, or back in undergrad. It was open note. So the professor basically gave us 3 pages and she said, you have a week, as long as you don't use other students' help. And it was kind of like honor code. Then you'd be like fine. And for some, it was just like the least stressful exam I think I've ever taken. The material was really difficult. You had to memorize like a lot of formulas, and the material was difficult, but the way she gave the exam completely quashed any anxiety I had surrounding it. And I think it's because it was open note. Like Grace was mentioning, it's a memory game. So I think when you take that component away, it really like reduces your stress levels. But I just don't know how like applicable open note exams could be for every exam. So maybe just like final exams could be open note, and then you have like closed note quizzes throughout the course, or something like that. I don't know, just a thought. And then I pass to Kate.
Thanks. Yeah, I suppose I can kind of echo Trina in a sense that for the restorative justice module we have at the minute, we were given kind of like quite a broad spectrum to go for. But I think I'll have to be a bit, no offense, but there was a semester last semester, I should say, during my surveillance module. And that was very open in the sense that we didn't have like to pin it on a particular topic. All we had to do was make sure that what we could do, what we wrote about was essentially empirical in some sense, so that we could relate it to, what's happening actually. And I really enjoyed that just because I felt it gave me a chance to really engage with the literature properly and to actually see it in real life. So I'll pass to Emma.
So I think it's been my typical experience studying restorative justice in grad school that the majority of the classes have a like end final essay accompanied with a presentation, and it's the majority of my grade. So I kind of want to clarify that because I think if I were to discuss an experience that I learned a lot from and benefited from and like appreciated, it would be one of my classes this semester. In preparation for our final project, it was kind of discussed the first few weeks of class, and then it was returned to after a few more weeks, and then it was returned to again, and it was returned to again, and then, you know, months before the presentation was actually due, we had our final outlines due, and we got feedback on them. And so I feel like that approach really diminishes a lot of stress and anxiety and confusion, a lot of expectation. If you're working continuously on a big grade or project towards the end of class, you can apply more material, you can kind of fine tune your thoughts a little more, especially with more time. And I don't know, I try at my absolute best not to be a procrastinator, but I think when you're inundated with lots of classes and other responsibilities, you can't help but procrastinate some of the time. And an approach like this really, really eradicates that opportunity. You can't procrastinate, and in turn you don't get stressed because you procrastinated, and finally in turn I think you get a lot more out of the assignment. And Grace.
Thank you. Yeah, I do agree with Trina about the restorative justice assignment. That is great. Like it's so broad, but it's broad, but it's actually really creative at the same time. And I honestly probably would have absolutely hated it if I got it in first year, because I would have thought, oh my God, where do I go with this? But when you've been focused on such a specific like niche for so long, and then you get given a broad question, somehow you just get that little burst of creativity, like, oh, I can do it on this because I actually am passionate about this now after doing it for so long. Or thinking, like, say for example, my dissertation topic, I'm very like strongly passionate against that, or towards that. But I thought, oh, I'll pick another topic to actually learn about, because I know I have the research skills from years of college. Thought, here, let's give this a go. And it's great. Like, I love the fact that it's so broad. But I was just thinking as well about a module that we had in final year undergraduate. It was youth justice, but we had to do, they were like weekly reflective diaries on the topic that we were doing that week, and we just had to pick one article and just write on it. And I, looking back, it was a piece of work I was quite proud of, because it just looked really well. It looked like you were working from day one, knew everything about that. You were really like engaged from day one based on the work that you had done over those 8 weeks. And I thought that was a great sort of project as well. So like, as opposed to just one essay at the end that's worth so much, like little kind of diaries like that I think are nice. And you hate doing them at the time, but at the end it's such a complete piece of work that it just looks really well. So I pass it back to you, Alana.
Thank you, Grace. And I'm going to actually pass it and introduce Carla, who is joining us, and then segue into our breakout groups. But I will first pass it to Carla.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I just got out of class, my last class for the semester. So my name is Carla Barron. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So this semester is really different from last in a lot of ways, but they've both been equally great. I wanted to share on a really great experience I had with my principals in restorative justice. I took it with Mark Wenberg this semester, and he really infused the idea of circle facilitation. And so we held our classes, each participating and facilitating circles of our topics, which really also aligned with our reflection paper. So after we did, there was a series of reflection papers that we did regarding the readings and how they tie into restorative justice, but also we either have the opportunity to partner up with a fellow colleague in the class or individually and do our own circle facilitation. So I conducted one with a colleague of mine on restorative justice and education and the Soto prison pipeline. Others had done mass incarceration. So it really allowed us to touch on the topics that we're passionate about and how to incorporate restorative justice, theories into practice, which I really appreciated because essentially those are things that we want to do, right? In our career field, but also I think in other spaces, because I'm a firm believer now after this semester that restorative justice can be applied in all areas of our life. So it's been a really great experience. I did take another class that was completely online, and that was restorative justice and education. And that instructor also has hold circle facilitations on a bi-weekly with assigned individual groups. So one that allowed us to interact with our colleagues in the class on a more interpersonal level, but then also touch on topics that were related to the content each week. So we're able to meet each other, and build those relationships, everything that RJ, stands for, and getting to know the deeper rooted, experiences that we all have. So those are my takeaways that were different, because we did some circle facilitation in some of my classes last semester, but we were the circle keepers this semester in those two classes, which was really great because it helped me relate the materials that we were learning and also how to apply that in larger settings, but also in like my daily life, with my family members and my friends. And so really good practice and how to just kind of hone in on those skills. So with that, I'll hand it back to Lana.
Thank you, Carla. So I will hand it back to Ian to introduce the breakout groups. And before we hop into those groups, I may just post the questions in the chat so that they are, I think you'll be able to still see those when you go into breakout. I hope, just so that they are fresh to see.
Thanks, Alana. I'm just trying to organize the groups so we've got one facilitator in each of them. If you were able to fill the void for just 90 seconds or so.
Yeah, no problem. So just to, if it's possible, I'm actually not sure if the whole group chat will translate in the breakout group. So if you want to individually save those questions, or someone in, at least if the group of students maybe could save them so that you can have for reference in the groups.
Yeah, you've all got them in the PDF as well. They're in there.
Right. So, and I think this was also in the PDF, but it would be great if students will be facilitating, but beyond that, if someone is willing to, and you can decide in the groups who would be willing to take notes, and then who also would be willing to share back when we reconvene to share some highlights of what was discussed. And it looks like there's a lot of things to discuss. I'm looking at the chat and I think there's a lot of really great responses to what's been said, and kind of areas that maybe people are looking to go a little bit deeper into.
Yeah, it's not I'm not seeing Carla on here. I'm gonna have to just open the groups and then I'll deal with it in a second. But
Okay.
whoever takes notes, please do try and take some quite comprehensive notes if you can, because we won't be able to record the breakout rooms. So, not only will you feed back to the group, but also, if it's okay, we'll collect what you write down afterwards so that we can, write this up and so on. So I'm gonna hopefully open all the rooms now. Hopefully everyone's going to have a facilitator. If there's not a student in your group, then someone facilitate it. I'll try and work it out, but please go on ahead. So you should have an invitation to join a group now. Alana, it wouldn't let me not put you in one, so maybe you can just
That's
not
okay.
accept.
I can choose to say not
Just
now.
choose to say, yeah. Okay. Oh, I see here. Carla, I can assign you to 6. You're going to. Okay. So that's so everyone should have a group now. And oh, and Sylvina, I'll put you in 6 as well. Okay, guys.
We'll see you
Go.
soon.
See you soon. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Just come back from our breakout rooms here. And no problem if you have to head off to teach, but good to see everyone who's able to stay. I will just maybe go around the breakout rooms. Shall I just do that, Alana? Is that okay? I'll just go around some of the people and ask. We've got about 20 minutes or so. So if everyone can give, and I think we had drafted the question here, but provide 2 or 3 main highlights of what came up in discussion from your breakout rooms. Feel free to speak for certainly 3 minutes or so, if you would like. And everyone, feel free to keep going in the chat. I can see. So you ran out of time. Great. Well, we gave you ages, so that means that the conversation was rich, was deep, and I look forward to hearing from everyone now. So we have our 6 groups, and I will go first to Carla, if I may, from group 6. Would you come on the mic, Carla? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I think the conversation was really enriching. I heard a lot
Carla, sorry,
of
can I just stop you there just for 1
how
second?
do we apply?
Yeah, Carla, could you you're not coming through very well. Would you maybe be willing to try just turning off your camera? Sometimes that helps for the sound to come through.
Does that work better?
That is slightly better. Yeah, I think that should. Thanks so much, Carla.
I'm so sorry. I've had horrible Wi-Fi connection all week.
Not at
so
all.
a lot of what I heard and what was discussed is how to help the students go out in community and practice, these theories that we're getting to build those community relationships. So kind of an assessment based on that versus, a peer-to-peer assessment and within the classroom. So how do we begin to move into community and hold those spaces so that one, as students, can get a better understanding of how to apply these practices in the real world in a community setting. And then there was also some discussion about some resistance from an institutional level. How are we going to have a program and help our students really understand what it is to be restorative or live restoratively versus it just being a program on its own and not an actual way of life, so to speak. If the universities are not themselves holding them accountable for implementing, RJ practices in theory, from whether it's academic misconduct policies, things like that. And trying to invite more, I think, more restorative perspectives into the classroom. There was a lot of talk of having discussions on lived experiences. Speaking from the I know that's something that we don't talk about in our JD classes, and I can imagine that's what other students deal with, in their JD classes, and how this can relate, to the larger picture of things. The other thing was, let me see my notes. Emma had really brought up a really great how she does mentoring and support after the courses end for students. And so that one way, I think the way I interpret it was holding circles for students to, discuss their lived experiences, but also continue practicing what they have been taught in those sessions, similar to what we're doing in our Tuesday chats that we have on campus, which have been really great, just to kind of hold those spaces and kind of go around in circle practice. The other thing was evaluations, I think, because of standardized, practices within the institution. Again, how to build a more restorative justice culture on campus, but the institutions, are really critical on numbers and evaluations and outcomes and things like that. And that kind of takes away, I think, from a lot of the content that students are trying to understand, because they're so concerned with, grades and just the standards that faculty and the weight that faculty feel on trying to meet those standards when it comes to those policies on campus. And I think that takes away from really what students are trying to learn. And then the overarching assumption of just the typical ways of a criminal justice system. Sylvina had mentioned in Argentina, that is just, it's black and white in that sense. Like there's no alternatives, and there's a resistance for a lot of places and institutions that still see the legal system as that, and how to move away from those perceptions and those ideals, especially in a law school setting. And I know there's a couple other, but I can't really, my notes are a little jumbled up, so I will go ahead and pass it off.
That's okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Carla. And I'll go then to Grace, Grace's group.
Shall I speak, or is it just this group? Will I nominate someone from the group?
You could speak if you'd like. Did you also take the notes?
I did.
Here, go ahead, Grace. Let's hear your 2 or 3 main things.
They're okay, so the first one that I thought was really that instantly just changed what we have been talking about before we were in the breakout rooms was how difficult it must be to be the professor, because it's all well and good for us to talk about how we have all these ideal changes, but realistically it's quite difficult to get all students on side and make sure that everyone wants to make these changes, make sure they're like valid forms of changes. It must be a lot of work. So the structural differences kind of make life really make it really difficult to make a significant change that is more long term. My notes are in an absolute mess. I just we had kind of discussed what we thought would like help students and professors meet halfway, in a more realistic way. We were talking about how to like voice conflict straight away, how establishing a rapport and the power dynamic, that establishment from the off is really, really, really important to establish a good relationship between the student and the professor. The concept of smaller classes as well, how they would really help to collab, to make assessments much to make the assessments flow much better. Just to collab in smaller classes, you can get a better approach. You could do it year on year to tailor to the students each year, but you could only do it if it is a smaller group. So there are a couple of main points that I had jotted down. If anyone else from the group would like to contribute to.
No, that's fantastic, Grace. I'm just going to cut it if that's okay there, just to go to the next group. But please, everyone, feel free to keep throwing more comments in the chat if there's anything you'd like to add to what your facilitator talks about here. And I'm going to go to group 4, which is Kyla.
Yeah, so we had a very rich conversation for question 1. Unfortunately, we didn't really have too much time, but so we talked a lot about exams that were most enjoyable, where those were open book, as the center of the focus wasn't so much on the material and trying to regurgitate it, but on how to apply those practically, because you didn't have like the burden of memorization hanging over you. Also assessing things like empathy can be rather difficult, but one member of my group, I think it was Colleen, who talked about how it doesn't matter whether you have a shifted perspective or not in the area of restorative justice, so long as you can articulate why you do or don't have it. That'll give the professor a way to understand where you're coming from. Establishing clear goals and expectations on the exam is another thing we talked about. And I think Dave mentioned this, and what I took from your comment was asking students how they want to be assessed. I thought was a really interesting way. No one's ever asked me if I want to write a paper or have like a final project. So I think having that flexibility in a class would be really, really helpful. And maybe a way to do that is, write a journal about all things RJ and include interesting articles that you have read, or, draw a picture about, what you're feeling about restorative justice at that point in time. But yeah, we had a really good conversation about changing maybe the traditional assessment.
Great. Thanks so much, Kyla. And I will go then to Kate's group, group 3.
Hi everyone. I just want to start off by thanking everyone who's in my group. That was great to get feedback from everyone. It was nice to see the other side of the curtain kind of thing. Catherine was very good to offer to take notes, so I will pass it to Catherine if that's okay.
Yep,
to go through.
No problem.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so we had a great discussion, really, and so I'm just going to run through a few of the points that were made. There was a huge big question mark about why exams at all, really. What's the need for them? What do they really do? There was a conversation about actually a lot of the times the lecturers are nearly in the same boat as the students, and that they're up against a particular system that they need to depending on their freedom in their course, they're dependent on to what extent they can tweak that system. So whether it's, does it have to be exam based or not? Also the tension between the workload of the lecturers and what they can actually physically do. So if they've 200 students, or one of our team has 70 people and actually gets them to do a weekly journal, which is an enormous workload on him. So there's that piece about tweaking the system. And then the other piece is then, so how do you, I suppose a big piece that Craig was really talking about was, how do you really get, so the quantitative system is at odds really with restorative justice values, if you like, the whole notion of a fair process and support and choice and all that. And I think, what is it Craig was really saying? We've got to be able to show direct evidence of learning, but really we've got to engage with the system as to all the different ways that we can show that direct evidence of learning. And especially if we're going to define restorative practice, as its own social science, that's a way forward. I'm sure I've left lots out.
That's perfect. Oh no, was there anything else there, Catherine?
Yeah,
you want to? Yeah, go on.
One of our group was saying he'd really like more collaboration with students. That often, so sometimes the students are managing the traditional way so well that actually bringing them into a thing that's less traditionally assessed can be quite difficult for them as well. And sometimes he's asking students to collaborate on the design of the assessment process, and they're saying, no, that's your job, it's not my job. So it's another point.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Catherine. I will go to Emma's group, group 2.
Sure. So the first half of our conversation really centered a lot around stress and how stress and good learning outcomes try to be friends in higher ed and really just are so far opposite from each other. And so basically how it's stressful for students just as much as it's stressful for professors a lot of the time, and how there are ways to diminish stress so long as we kind of look outside of the limits of what we're working with in a classroom, such as class sizes or exam types. There are different ways, it was argued by a few members, that you can actually create an exam where it does inspire higher order thinking and it's not super limited in assessment of how people interpret the material. And then the second half of our conversation kind of walked away from stress and more towards examples of how people in the field are applying RJ principles into their assessment process. Some examples were, instead of a grade, either passing or not, maybe sharing on a discussion thread or writing letters to people like guest presenters that come in. Some values that were mentioned were transparency. Like, it's not necessarily the assessment that is of critical importance, but how we get to the end assessment and through the course of the whole semester, really, including collaboration between students upon themselves and professors, and then trying as best as possible to eradicate the hierarchical nature of higher education. And lastly, making sure the process is fun. I think that's really important too.
Oh God, we got to do all that and make it fun. Okay, no, great. Thanks for that, Emma. Fantastic. And then finally, group one is Trina.
Hello. Yes, so I have picked out kind of two things that really kind of stood out, I think. The first one was particularly around communication with students, more so in the sense of how they can be involved and how we kind of level the playing field between that relationship of students and lecturers. So in terms of, involvement with assessments, what would that look like? Is it involvement in the questions? Is it involvement in the kind of grading of assessments, and that, you get students to kind of cross grade each other's work and give feedback that way and then use that to improve. And then it was also highlighted, what kind of issues would come up if you were to have a kind of system like that, where you have students grade each other. Would students feel obligated to take on that feedback, even if they didn't necessarily want to, even if it was good feedback and it was something that they could go towards, making an improvement to their assessment? Would they feel obligated to do it, and then therefore kind of harbor maybe slightly resentful relationships between students? And then, that was kind of like, how could we do student involvement in assessments in a way that would kind of mitigate that? So if you were to maybe do it anonymously, have students kind of anonymously grade each other and stuff like that. And a big emphasis is placed on feedback and maybe changing the way feedback is given. So, more kind of rich qualitative feedback on assignments in order to help students take that information and then learn from it and apply it to their next stuff. And then also not just, providing critical feedback in terms of where they went wrong and what they can improve, but also highlighting the strengths of a student's work so they know what to keep doing, kind of to, what's the word? No, it's gone. But basically showing students what they've done well so they know to keep doing that, while also showing them the areas that they can improve on. And then another thing that came up, which I thought was quite interesting, was kind of university structural issues and stigma around restorative practices in assessments. So the incorporation of restorative practices to assessments was dependent on the kind of the structure of the program or the course that it was on. If you're doing a course that has professional requirements or professional accreditations, there might not always be scope to include restorative practices in your assessment that way, because there are going to be certain things you do need to be assessed on. Another thing was that just because an assessment is done restoratively as opposed to the traditional kind of ways that universities do it, it doesn't detract from the rigor of the work or the legitimacy of assessing people that way. It's just a different way to do it, but more work is needed in this area to highlight that just because an assessment is restorative in its approach doesn't mean it's not still effectively evaluating students' learning.
Great. Good stuff. Thanks, Trina. Thanks everyone for that. Look, we are absolutely right on time. And so please feel free to keep giving reflections in the comments in the chat. But in order to finish on time, I'm going to go straight into this full group closing circle. And I would like to ask everyone if they would like to contribute. Feel free to pass, of course. But in one sentence, okay, what have you taken from today in one sentence? Just to keep things going, if it's okay with everyone, I'll call out the names, and we'll just go around everyone, and we should be able to do that in the 15 minutes. So I'll go first. For me, the one main thing was around community involvement, how to involve community in the assessment, not something I'd considered. Alana.
One sentence is hard. I think that learning needs to be able to show application. We need to know how to use what we're learning.
Thanks, Alana. Ingrid.
Oh geez, too early in the circle. I think my one takeaway, big takeaway would be to continue not using exams and to think about ways to provide that more qualitative, positive feedback on existing assignments.
Thanks, Ingrid. Jake.
I'll do cross-pollination of great ideas.
Thanks, Jake. Lisa.
I love having the space to reflect on teaching and assessment in an international context. It feels very special to me.
Thanks, Lisa. Colleen.
Thank you. I echo what Jake said. I was thinking about how fabulous it was to have the student perspective and the instructor's perspectives and the challenges, and just coming together and realizing that we all want the same thing. It's how to get there. We're all under the same challenges, and so that would be my sentence. That just bringing everybody together and creating this community to talk about this is I'm taking that away. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Paul.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'm just realizing to what degree the restorative principles are not present in current assessment design often.
Thanks, Paul. Catherine.
Actually, yeah, Paul stole my line. But yeah, I think that's it. To that, and the whole idea of actually, if we really do want to change things, we have to involve other people who are part of, you know, maybe even greater decision makers than anybody here, as part of the conversation, actually. Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine. Mark.
Oh, I really appreciated the core question about how to bring a restorative approach to assessments. And it's something that I've been thinking about. Just really took a lot away from listening both to the students' perspectives and also professors who are working in the field about their thoughts. So that was really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Patrizia.
Very inspiring for me. Share same feelings and challenges in this restorative justice community of students and teachers together.
Thanks, Patrizia. David? I think you said you might have gone already. David Wexler, if you're there, no worries. Susie?
Yeah, for me, it's what you said, Ian, how to involve the community outside of my classroom, the larger community in the assessment of my students. Social skills, deep listening skills, empathy skills, compassion skills, how to involve the community in assessments.
Thanks, Susie. Anna?
Hi, Ian. I think my reflection for today is about how to make assessments more restorative principled, and especially those principles like empowerment, non-domination, and compassion and support, because we can include those in our assessments. Thank you. It's been really lovely to hear from everyone.
Thanks, Anna. Stephanie?
Thank you, and thank you so much for creating this space for the conversation today. There's so many different things that I'm taking away. The thing, though, that I'm really reflecting on the most at the moment is just the passion of the students about the things that they want to learn about, and really building off of that passion, because I mean, that's why people are seeking learning, right? They're passionate about something. And so tapping into that engagement, I think, is really important and will help lift them up too. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Tim. Oh, you're just on mute there.
Avoid exams if you can.
Thanks, Tim. Craig.
Yeah, I think for me, it was similar to Stephanie's feedback. I think there's that tension between delivering curriculum and empowering students to learn what they're passionate about or within their own context.
Thanks, Craig. Kevin.
Thank you, Ian, again for organizing and your colleagues. To me, it was the challenge related to, as you said, engaging community more in how we assess students. And then the one I just heard around asking students more about how they would like to be assessed.
Thanks, Kevin. And oh my God, everyone's just bounced around on my screen there. Hopefully I'll remember where everyone is. Dave.
Hi, Ian, thanks, and Alana and everyone else as well. It's been really interesting. For me, I suppose the value has been listening to and speaking with loads of people from different perspectives. That's been really, really useful and really helpful. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. Sylvina. Yeah, you're off mute, but we can't hear you, Sylvina. Maybe I'll try and come back to you if that's okay. Oh yeah, no, there we go. Yeah.
Yes?
Yep, we're good.
Yes, I want to say that I want a more human justice. I think we can provide tools for the exercise of law in a more human way and provide soft tools so that the new legal operator achieves transformation in the perspective from which they see the user of the system during their training in the career. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvina. Rowan.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much for today. It's been brilliant hearing everyone's thoughts on this. I guess my main thing is that it's been so interesting to hear the kind of challenges of this from the side of students and lecturers kind of at the same time. So it's been a really good discussion.
Thanks, Rowan. Ram.
Well, first, three things. First, thank you for organizing this. Second, my apologies to everyone for cross-posting a message, which I was actually sending to David Wexler in reactivating the Nepal chapter. Third, one thing that I would like to, one thing that is a takeaway from me is do as much as you can. If you can't really change the whole system, do something that you can change the classroom at least.
Thanks, Ram. Emma Wheatley.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Alana and Carla, who was our facilitator. I'm similar to you, the piece around community-centric assessment and assessing the practical and real-life learning of RP and RJ really spoke to me. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Emma. Petra.
For me, the most inspiring were the new ideas, how I can enrich the class to keep the passion of the students, and also the idea like that they can choose their own way how they want to end up the course.
Thanks, Petra. Grazia.
Basically, I would say that the sense of possibility and the ability to communicate that assessment is a common issue and not a one-way activity.
Thanks, Grazia. Brenda.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ian and Alana in particular. I think what's coming out for me is it's the power of cross-institutional knowledge mobilization and capacity building for both the students. So by virtue of your two institutions working together but I also think, we're forging a new way forward, and we're going to need each other more and more to push back against those institutional barriers. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Brenda. Lindsay Owen.
Yes, thank you. This has been really helpful. I wish that it had happened in January. But that being said, I think my main takeaway is that I'd like to level the playing field and focus more on connection through involving the students in their own and each other's assessments. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. And Lindsay Pointer.
I'd just like to echo Gail's observation in the chat that this session provided a really good example of how to open a relational dialogue about assessment and creatively co-create some more restorative approaches to assessment. So thank you, Alana and Ian, and to the students for organizing and contributing. Sorry for the grunting baby also. Hopefully you could hear what I said.
Thanks a lot, Lindsay. And just finally, from the lectures from Carrie in the chat, is thinking about how varied our agency is in different areas when it comes to assessment, and how students all want to be able to apply what they've learned. So if I'm not mistaken, that's all the profs. So I will go now to the students for their kind of final reflections and one thing they're taking away. And I will start with Kate.
Hi everyone. I think the one thing I can take away from today is that the contention felt between by staff and students as well regarding feedback and assessment. It's nice to know we're not alone in that feeling. And I think I can echo Tim. I think he's gone now, but exams need to go.
Thanks, Kate. Kyla.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, like, the potential to change maybe what the traditional idea of an assessment and maybe what it looks like, and do it in a way that better effectively measures someone's understanding of what restorative justice is.
Thanks, Kyla. Trina.
Less of a comment and more so of a, I suppose, existential question. And if we just opened up a line of communication between staff and students more often, how more restorative would our assessments be across universities if we continued that practice as a normative function in universities?
Thanks, Trina. Grace.
Yeah, I absolutely share Kate's contention on the exams need to go from Tim. I thought that was great. That was very nice and concise. I liked it. I also think as well, something I would take away from it is to just, like, if we all shared a nice empowering ethos and we're all on, if we open up a direct line like this, things will change. Like this, we've been accepting change for years now. Who's to say we can't just change this ethos a lot, or change this method of teaching? Because a lot of people are sharing the same opinions. So we should all, I mean, the change is there if we just make it happen. So that's something I'll have in my head, and that not every method is going to work for everyone as well. To conduct stuff on a almost like a yearly basis with every group of students that you have, see what works best for them. Something I'll be thinking of.
Thanks, Grace. And Emma.
I'm walking away with this idea that not only are there more ways to assess students' knowledge, but there's actually endless ways to assess students' knowledge. And this is the first conversation I've ever been a part of, at least, where we're trying to dissolve the traditional approach.
Okay, thanks, Emma. I'm looking around. Is that, I think that's everyone. Please, someone tell me.
Just Carla.
Carla, where are you, Carla? Are you on my screen somewhere? Yes, thank you, Carla, please.
Let me turn my camera off. So it's not so much
a takeaway other than more a feeling of gratitude and hope, meeting everyone here in the space who are working to, change the institution, one, from a faculty perspective, and as someone who wants to go into academia, and those resistance. But also, I completely agree with Tim's get rid of exams, because you cannot measure a person's ability to do work, especially to, live restoratively, by numbers, so yeah, exams just need to be gone, and not just here but all across the board. So just, yeah, deep gratitude and hope for what's to come. And I will say that this whole process has been restorative in and of itself, so thank you, Alana and Ian, for holding this space for everyone.
Thank you so much, Carla. Alana, any final comments, reflections on that?
So much to reflect on. I'm so impressed with, we are on the dot, 2 o'clock. I want to honor everyone's time and thank you so much for being here. I also really just want to acknowledge and thank you all for, this is probably the most camera on and faces on a call I've seen. So I think it was great seeing you all, even if it's little squares. It just so wonderful being in this space. So many countries coming together, so many perspectives, and I hope we can continue to evolve this conversation and this work.
Thanks so much, Alana. And just by way of my deep gratitude to the students who joined us today, in particular, for their willingness to, put their necks out there, talk openly in front of everyone, participated in the design of the session, facilitated the breakout rooms. Just absolutely fantastic, guys. I'm so grateful. And your insights, there's a million things. I love and hate you in equal measure, because now I got to do some stuff. So thanks for that, I suppose. But thanks again to everyone, for your time and for joining today. We'll find a way to circulate, the recordings, the notes. I don't know what we're going to do with it yet in terms of outputs, but we're going to do something with it. And you guys all have plenty of outputs in your head. Thanks so much, Alana, and all your colleagues at Vermont Law School. Love collaborating with you guys. And what can I say? Thanks, everyone. And I'll talk to you later. Till next time.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Ian. And Alana.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And the students.
Have a lovely day,
Bye.
night, morning.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.